to if
Oh,
this
how do I do?
decides to
Oh, wait, hang on. I know I'm like a
chat.
newbie. Oh, stream.
You are live and raw with Susie and Angie sounding off this morning. While we wait for people to trickle in here, if anybody's actually listening, they're going to get a hilarious little behind the scenes look at the two of us going like this. Susie's fixing her hair, and I'm like, Susie, I look awful. I'm plane ready over here because I'm flying out in a few hours. And the grays are coming out. Luckily, you can't see it on the screen. It just means we have good experience, and that is what we are sharing with people, Susie.
We are completely being vulnerable and transparent here because we don't have anything else but just being us today.
I don't know how else to be. I also be a little loopy because I have had a very early meeting this morning to get some things in before I fly back east. I'm about to go to 2 back-to-back events, and it's going to be super fun. But I've had coffee and no food, so I am not responsible for anything that comes out of my mouth in the next 38 minutes, Susie. Let's just say that.
I'm going with that too, which just opens up permission for so much. Which I love.
Hey, these are leadership conversations no one prepares you for. And if we're not prepared for it, then hey, that just tells you it is exactly the type of conversations that you might be coming across in your leadership and executive journey. And we do have a good one that we were kind of thrown around before I actually just was like, Susie, I'm hitting record, we're going. Or I'm hitting go live. Here we go.
Like, what do I do? What do I do?
And it's the little word called influence.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite topics. And I think a lot of people don't realize that influence is beyond something you earn. It's not something you can demand. And it is beyond, it's your shadow. So you have to be careful because it can be something that you unintentionally use in a not positive. It can be positive and negative.
And I think influence can be, I agree that it's not really created, it's earned, but that doesn't mean it can't be intentional.
Yes.
At the same time. And I think that's where you have to be cautious of. It's a lot like, as the one with no kids, I'll say it's like having kids, right? They're watching, even if you aren't necessarily saying specific things, and there's modeled behavior is passed down through like silent influence, right? And so we have to think about that from a team perspective of what am I influencing on my team? What do I intentionally want to and not want to influence? Whether it's a communication style, whether it's, there's all kinds of different things there that if you're not careful, they can become, negative or unintentional, influences that become like cultural, right? Like culture is intentional. It's not accidental. And the way you influence your team and your people is one of the things that influences culture.
Yeah. I think about, I worked for a big company that it was acceptable to be late to meetings. And so nobody showed up on time to meetings. And there was even executives that would be like, oh yeah, that's just like what we do. And it was so interesting because you're right. The influence that people have, the bad habits that you create can just become accepted. And you may not even realize that you're the catalyst of that.
And it's here's the thing, in this specific example, this is the leadership conversation people don't prepare you for because you don't think about it. In that situation, okay, whatever, you can be late occasionally. Both Susie and I were late today. However, routinely being late to meetings is not about time management, in my opinion. It is a respect issue. That says I don't respect anyone's time. I don't respect this room enough to be in it and start it on time. And that's a completely different modeled behavior to influence. And that's the kind of thing that people will pick up on, right? It isn't like, oh, we're just always late, so we're always late. No, it is what does always late mean? And what do other people therefore assume from that behavior?
Yes. And just think about this. We're all different in terms of how we are geared. And so my dad would always tell, he's still alive. He's just turned 96. He is always early. Like in my mind, he's always 10 minutes early. And I'm always on time. And when I asked him about, because there's 5 of us and one of us, like there's people that his kids are at different levels of being on time. And I'm usually like right on the dot. And he goes, "You're optimistic about time." And it made me realize that my on time
Is
is
his
not
late.
his on time.
Yeah.
And so that bleeds into your everyday. Like if you are working for a leader that really has that bias about time and gets really annoyed and thinks it's disrespectful, because I agree with you, but not everybody would think being late is disrespectful, depending on how you're
Right.
geared.
Totally.
You always have to be, you have to recognize that even if that's your way, it doesn't mean that you could destroy your influence by not showing up the way your boss needs you to. Does that make sense?
Mm.
Did I bring
Oh
that
yeah.
around?
Well, because there's the it's like respect, or maybe it could be seen as perception and reality, Instagram versus reality, right? The perception there is either it could be I don't respect you or this room enough. It could be I don't care about this enough, right?
Yeah.
And so it creates potentially perceptions and or assumptions or misconceptions simply because of how you treat time. And Susie, I'm totally the same. I grew up in a house where if you're early, you're on time, and if you're on time, you're late.
Yeah.
We're talking like we got to freaking church a half an hour before church, like there was going to be a run on pew space. And let me just tell you, there was never a run on pew space, but we were like a half an hour early to everything. And I do think that there is a limit to which early is on time is actually the truth. I think your dad has the 10-minute rule pretty set. But like, for instance, like when people show up in my Zoom room 12 minutes early, I get irritated because they just are sitting in
Yeah.
the waiting room lurking. And it's
Yeah.
like, now I can't be present to the last 12 minutes of whoever I'm with. So there's situations, and that's totally true. Like it has different triggers for kind of different people.
Totally. It's like they're
And
knocking on the door. Like,
I
even though
totally
they're knocking on the
They're
door. Yeah.
knocking. Yeah. So it's also situational, right? Because if
Yeah.
you're gonna go to an interview in person,
Yes.
you do wanna be there 10 minutes early. However, you're probably gonna sit in a lobby. You're gonna say hi to a receptionist. You're gonna
Yeah.
sit in a lobby. You're not gonna be standing in the boardroom going, "You done with this candidate yet?" So
Yeah.
it's also situational. And I would think that brings us back to kind of the awareness piece that
Mhm.
totally does harken back to influence and being aware of what you are and aren't, and intentionally influencing, let's say, the right things and not the wrong things, or the right behaviors and not the desired behaviors and not the wrong behaviors.
Yeah. And you can't demand it either. Like,
Yeah.
I had a client, I'm on retainer for some companies, and so whenever I get the, "Hey, can you work with this person?" I'm kinda like, "Okay, what's behind the curtain?"
Why?
Um, yeah, and so it always reveals itself within the first 5 minutes. And he gets on and he goes, "I'm gonna be the youngest VP in our organization." I'm like, "Oh, interesting. So, like, what do you do to, work on that?" And he goes, "Well, I make sure that it's really known." I go, "Tell me more." And he said, "In every one of like, when I'm with my colleagues, when I'm on, I'm introducing myself, I always say, 'I'm gonna be the youngest VP in this organization.'" And I'm like, "Well, how do you think that makes your peers feel?" He
Yeah.
never thought about that. I go, you can't demand that it's gonna happen. You really need to illustrate it in ways that you show up, and
Yes.
not you can seed those ideas in the right rooms,
Yeah.
but professing it or wearing it on a sandwich board
May
is
not be
the
the right.
way.
Well, and
Yeah,
this goes back to, in my mind, the idea that influence is earned, not created, because it typically comes from show instead of tell. In other words, it comes back to actions speak louder than words. And we can tell people things all we want in order to feel like we have influence, but eventually that really just turns into authority
yeah,
versus, showing what we want them to do, be, and being kind of like an actual example in action. And one of the things to me that comes into mind there is, like, as you grow into higher levels of leadership and move into kind of like executive leadership, this becomes even truer, right?
mhm,
Because now influence and orchestration are actual core functions of your job and not actually like doing the thing.
yeah,
And that's where, like, walking in and professing that, hey, I'm going to be the youngest whatever in this company may not be the type of communication or precedence you really want to set in order to maintain the trust
yeah.
within the organization that you need in order to have that foundation of influence as you grow up the ladder.
Yeah. And I think too, we assume things that what you said just made me think about one time I had a discussion with somebody about like, what does a CEO of a big organization do all day? And like
Mm,
when we like looked at it, we were like, oh, that's so interesting. They don't look at their calendar because they have somebody to do that. They don't really send out a lot of emails, like somebody is helping them do that. They basically have like a notebook maybe that they're taking notes on, and they're just taking meetings and making decisions. And so
yeah.
when you think about what they do every day and then show up for them, that changes it that should shift you out of your head in terms of how you need to show up to thinking
Yes.
about what do they need me to give them so that they can make this decision.
What which comes back to we've talked about this either last month or the in one of our first couple ones of these, that leadership is not about you.
Mhm.
And I think that that totally ties into this idea of influence because if you're trying to be influential, you're making it about you versus, letting it be kind of more natural yet still intentional and about the other people that you lead because truly that's what leadership is.
Yeah. And so when you think about so the research around that in terms of getting people's buy-in is that people are 5 times more likely to be all bought in if you bring them along. And so for me, what that looks like is if even if you and your team work on this plan that everybody said you're responsible for, if you go and present it and go, "Here's the plan, here's our laminated plan, let's go." Everybody in the room is gonna feel like they don't have their fingerprint on it. So instead,
Mm,
just like changing, "Here's the plan that we've come up to with what else would you say? What questions do you have? What would you add?" That changes your ability to influence because you're allowing them to have a voice. The other part is you're shutting them down.
yes. Yes. And that comes back to the fact that, again, as you increase your level of leadership, you create your level of influence and like because you are more visible.
Yeah.
And being very cautious of how you empower or how you stifle the people below you is not
Yeah.
only directly tied to your influence, but also dictates the culture that you're going to work in and how people are going to want to work with you and not. And this is an interesting thing to be talking about in this snapshot because I see this friction really commonly right now. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that like the nature of leadership is changing and the nature of work is changing, right? Work has changed, but humans haven't. And that friction is real because we've got kind of, let's say, seasoned is a better word than older, which is what I wanted to say. But
I'm
we've,
seasoned.
most leadership and executives are most executives at the very, very top are of one of the two, maybe even three in extreme cases, older generations who do work differently
Yeah.
and expect different leadership, expect influence to be more authoritative than earned and natural. And that is in like direct competition with the fact that younger professionals and even mid-career professionals don't want to work in that environment. And this is why I think, Susie, and this is one of the reasons why we felt compelled to start having some of these conversations that people don't prepare you for because the conversations are going to happen now, right? You have to be prepared for this kind of stuff because we're at this inflection point that's going to force these kinds of conversations. And so being aware of what am I communicating now and how am I acting and is that what I want it to be and what how I would want others to be and how am I making others to feel in that moment is really important.
Yeah. It goes back to what Gallup says about followers of great leaders. They instill followers look for people who instill trust, compassion, hope, and stability. And I think that especially now when we have so many tools that can help us be a thought leader, I'm using air quotes, and that will make us think faster and send things, create things faster. We really need to be thinking about those attributes of how we make people feel around us. I'm pulling on your word feel because it's so important. And if we get too tied up in making our leadership easier or faster, influence will be lost and we won't even realize it.
Yep. That's it. And that's the thing is like the trust and influence to me are like two sides of the same coin, and you don't build culture, you don't have team, you don't have retention without trust. All
Mm,
relationships come down to trust.
yeah,
And it's one of those things that some people look at it as like trust is earned, not freely given. I think that's tricky. But I also think influence is the same. Yes, you can earn it, but also it can be freely established
yeah,
if you are a thoughtful human leading humans in the way that they want to be led. And that's where I think we have to be conscious, especially as you grow in your career as a leader into an executive, where everyone's watching you do that, even all the way down to a line level staff, right?
yeah. It is tricky. I like the visual of leadership is like a safari, like you're responsible for a piece of land, and as you're an individual contributor, you're responsible and looking down, and your influence is just influencing the person that you work for. And then you get good at that and they give you people that work for you, and then it's up and down. But as you go through your journey, you're going to the leader that's on the elephant, you're getting closer to the elephant. You can like hear that. You have to decide what you
Yes.
tell people. And as you go up, you like hold on to the elephant and you can see like your colleagues, you can look out, you can go, hey, there's a lion coming.
Yes.
Like you give them perspective too. It's not your responsibility, but you give them perspective. And then people see you, hear about you, understand you, and you don't even touch them, not literally, but you don't even have an interaction with them. And I think that's such an important thing to think about is as you go up on that elephant, you are seen more than you realize. And that's a
Yep.
huge responsibility.
Yes. And that is, I think that to me is the crux of this whole conversation
Yeah.
about you're influencing whether you know it or not. Are
Yes.
you influencing the way that you would want to intentionally want to?
Yeah, for sure. And
Mhm.
you don't, I think this really landed for me a few years ago. I was on a plane and somebody that worked for me early in my career when I was like, oh, leadership is a pain in the butt. It's just like hard because it's hard. And I didn't realize that. And a friend told me, it shows that you don't like it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, but she said, you gave me a piece of advice that stuck with me my whole career. And I don't remember that day. I have no idea what I
Isn't
told
that
her.
amazing?
And I'm like, thank goodness I showed up that day. Thank goodness I gave, like, thank goodness I had that piece of wisdom. It wasn't by something I read. You know what? It wasn't something I was like, let me tell you about this. You don't know what little tidbit lands and stays.
That's a thing. And that's why you're influencing whether you know it or not. And this is the kind of stuff that like I've had people that'll be like, "Oh my gosh, this is so inspiring." Somebody I've known for 30 years who I'm friends with on Facebook and haven't talked to in 29 years and 11 months is like, "Oh my gosh, this helped me so much."
Yeah.
You just never know. And I think that's true from a leadership perspective, and I think it's true from a human perspective,
Yeah.
right? We as people on this planet, especially because we're all so visible now, are influencing one way or the other.
We are. And the more human we can be, I think the more influential you are
Yeah.
because we're all facing so many similar challenges,
Yep.
but we like don't think it's okay to just be open about that. Somehow,
Yes.
especially in leadership, it's scary to show that you don't know what to do, but we're
Yeah.
all kind of figuring it out.
Somebody put a comment up that I think is a great place for us to go from here. They say, talk about collaboration and what it really means. And I think this is so spot on and integrated into this conversation because some leadership feels as if collaboration, and I am going to put that in quotes, means I give you a direction, you flesh it out, execute, and then I put my name on it.
Oh my gosh.
There's a leadership conversation no one's prepared for and needs to have. Susie, you get to sound off first.
Wow, that's so interesting. I'm trying to think of I so many people's faces flash before my eyes about that. I think that's an old school, like that's an old school perspective on collaboration. And I think where leaders get afraid to collaborate is they think they have to be the smartest person in the room when their team gets together. And I think that if you can collaborate and share openly about a challenge that you're facing, I think that's really key instead of being like, I'm going to listen to all of you. That's what it makes me think. I'm going to listen to all of you and see what your answer is. And then I'll tell you if you're right or wrong. And, obviously taking that with them. But I think it's sitting in the seat and being open to not just your ideas, but listening to other people. I think
Yes.
when we collaborate, we think about what we bring, but I think that it's also being really thoughtful to listen and understand everybody in the room, and I think that's where leaders have a great opportunity to not just think about what are people talking about, but who's talking and what can they bring and how can I pull out their great ideas.
It is, to me, it is listening to hear and not speaking to be heard. Like,
Mhm.
we blah 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 blah. Say two people who have just blah 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 for 21 minutes. However, the fact that somebody had this very thoughtful question means they're listening, right? And I think for so long, you hit the nail on the head. For so long, we lived in that you stay in your lane and you do what I tell you to do kind of leadership mentality. And that's just what isn't jiving anymore for many reasons. Generational, like we talked about a few minutes ago, but just because work has changed and become so much more cross-functional and collaborative in the true nature of the word collaborative, it's really hard to say you stay in your lane and you do what I tell you to do, especially because we did talk about this last month. You have people doing stuff on your team that you actually don't know how to do anymore
Yeah.
because of the complexity and the number of subject matter experts we need, right? I have never gone in and developed an LLM, but I know how to use the heck out of generative AI. However, that person is always going to know more than I have because they grew up with it. And that's why we can't just be here's what you're going to do, or here's what I did, while person who actually did it sits next to them. And so there is something to be said for, let's say, the we mentality
Yeah.
in the boardroom, and making sure that, let's say, credit is given where it's due and where it's appropriate, so that the collaborative nature of things does work out,
Yeah.
and does become apparent. But there is one caveat here that I come across a bunch. If you are a leader or an executive and you are out looking for a new role, now the we does have to become an I, and that can become really difficult to start thinking about, well, here's how I led the team to do a thing versus the we get used to talking about kind of at
Yeah.
work. But I think if you want to have a collaborative team, mean it in the truest sense, which is, let's hear what all the stakeholders have to say, making sure the right stakeholders are in the room, and that input is actually taken into account. And even if it is not incorporated into the solution, the people that gave it know why. So there's
Yeah.
like a context and a whole feedback loop, because that's, people want to have an understanding of context and be kind of informed and not just stay in the lane and tell you what you want to do. And to me, that's how we, in my opinion, the answer to this question, what collaboration really should mean, even if it doesn't necessarily always right now.
Yes, what came to mind for me is, and I get this a lot, is what if you're having that conversation and you are opening it up for a lot of people and you get a lot of duds. You get a lot of things that aren't something how do you handle that in that moment so that you don't, shut down that person or discount what they said? And it can get really tricky when you do that. And then the other piece is we all have biases too. Like
Yes.
if there's somebody that is working on our team that they annoy us, or you're not supposed to say that out loud, but it's true. We're all biased to who we jive with, who we can chat with and collaborate with, and we might keep people out because of that bias. We might not
Yep.
treat them the same if they're in the room, and it's really important that you stay objective for every
Yes.
voice. But then also, how do you help people understand that was good or bad, or like how do you judge, quote unquote, judge that?
I feel like now everyone needs to go listen to last month's talk about feedback.
Yeah,
However,
very
and
fair.
again, I will be the one that takes us back to the word influence at the beginning, because again, as you grow into higher levels of responsibility and leadership, you have more eyeballs on you. And if you're anything like me, your face is going to betray you, even if you're doing a good job of giving everybody the voice at the table, right? And
Yeah.
so the objectivity to me becomes more important to that intentional influence, because if you show your tell, others will observe it. And what does that become? Modeled behavior.
Mm.
And that, in my opinion, becomes a fragment in the culture that you could have started at the top simply by showing something that you were thinking without necessarily knowing it. And so that's one of those things where, like, if a voice needs to be at the table, it has to be heard equally, whether or not you have a personal bias towards it or not.
Yeah. It's hard.
It's so
It's
hard.
hard
None of
to
this is
do.
easy. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Leadership isn't easy. It's harder
No.
in a lot of ways because your responsibility is people instead of an output. That's
Yeah.
infinitely harder.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really hard, and I think that a best practice to get people to be good at that is to really give yourself a pep talk before you go in. Like,
Oh
prepare
yeah.
for that and think, "All right, I'm gonna be really open to that person's ideas, even though, I know that they take a long time." It could be a lot of things. They take a long time to get it out. They don't tie it together. They interrupt. They can be a lot of things that it may not just be the idea. It might just be the way that that person shows up. And so really preparing yourself to think, how do you stay objective in
Mhm.
that moment to pull all of the right strings at the right time?
For some reason, what comes to mind is like something that I think is like even further 30,000 foot view up broader, is that sometimes these conversations, right? Leadership conversation no one's prepared you for, are things you need to be discussing with yourself.
Hmm.
And maybe that's the place to start, right?
Yeah,
Whether it's, what type of influence do I want to have and am I intentionally modeling it, to where are my biases and how am I going to remove those from the boardroom today, or anything in
yeah.
between. Sometimes the most important person you need to be talking to is right in front of you in the mirror.
Yep. So they say that self-awareness goes down as you go up in the organization.
Oh, I completely. Oh, and well, and I think a lot of that, because this is something I'm going to start. I actually was writing an article about this, so this is like you're catching me at a good time.
Good.
I think part of that is because your sounding board also becomes smaller, right?
Yeah,
Your
yeah,
feedback loop becomes harder to come by, and
yep,
getting honest feedback, honest perspectives becomes harder because people fear giving it. And
yep,
so it becomes, you shrink inward and become almost your own little silo sometimes.
yeah,
And I think that's why it's really important to make sure you're seeking outside perspectives, whether it's in your organization. This is what the type of stuff Susie and I do, people. So there you go. There's your sales pitch of the day. But sitting in your own lack of self-awareness because no one is willing to tell you the truth is not a productive way to lead, nor a way that you're going to be prepared to have these conversations.
yeah. And if you're sitting there thinking, I don't need that, I'm really aware, I'm gonna say, like,
Go open your
you
emails
need
right now and type in SUS or ANG.
Totally. And honestly, those are the people I don't like to work with, because I wanna work with people that want to have growth, and I want to work with people who understand that they're a work in progress and they're evolving. And at the highest level, I'll tell you, behind closed doors, those people are still trying to figure it out. A
Yep.
very that's what the
And that's a
conversation is
posture to
always.
hide the insecurity,
Yeah,
instead of just being willing to lean into the vulnerability and grow through it. And guess what? That's what good, effective, sustainable leaders do.
yeah, yeah, they make that vulnerability isn't about telling people your whole life story. It's about just in the moment being able to kind of say what's on your mind and not
Yeah.
try to polish it for
Yeah.
the room, because executives need to learn that polish. They need to learn how to show up in different situations. But
Yeah.
as you get more seasoned, as you say, you learn how to flex that in the situations that you need it or not.
Yeah, and I think what we have to be careful of is for that to end up becoming like a shapeshift into something different that then we lose sight of the, like, authenticity, right? Because, yeah, we all have to show up in certain rooms in context, but at our core, we should still be showing up as the same human with the same strengths and the same values. And I think, after a while of sitting at the top without a whole lot of trusted advisors, honest feedback, and a sounding board, we start to we start to lose the self-awareness, and we lose the connection with that, like, authentic person, because we've
Yeah.
started to adopt
Yeah.
the language, the jargon, and that posture. And it's not that there isn't a time and place for that, but it still should be built on the foundation of who you really are,
Yeah.
and not who you think you need to be or who the environment has shaped you into. Because that
Yeah.
also, by the way, is exhausting.
Totally. And it's interesting though. Well, let me ask you this. I got this question yesterday, and they said, what is the fine line between influence and manipulation?
Oh. Okay, so I think this goes back to who's it for?
Hmm.
Influence is, I would say, intrinsic, radiating outward, and someone I don't wanna say receives it, that's the wrong someone observes it, versus manipulation is an external force applied.
That's interesting. Okay, so I'm gonna answer it too, and let's see
Or
how we
intent
connect.
also comes into there, right? What's your intent? Malice or
Yeah.
malice or not? Okay, I wanna hear
Um,
yours.
yeah, your intent. Yes, that's where I was gonna go. If you are influencing for the betterment of the business, and the goal is for that, for the business or the organization or the person in front of you, if it's for self-serving interests, then that becomes
Yes.
more manipulative because you're doing it
Mhm.
for you. That's negative politics to me, and I
Yeah,
think
like driving an agenda.
yes, and it gets more dangerous because we don't automatically just identify when it's personal, and when there's pressure, when there's changes in the organization, when there's outside factors that make us feel less confident, that
Mhm.
creates scarcity mindset, and scarcity mindset puts yourself in focus first. We think about our
Yes.
interests first. And guess what? At the negotiation table, if the other side thinks about their interests first, guess what you think about first?
You are in the
Yours.
win-loss mentality, which I wanna throw a third word in here that I think is the middle, and that's persuasion. Because there is, to me,
Okay.
a difference between influence, which, almost way this is gonna sound bad and not entirely the right manifestation of what I think. In a way, influence is like slightly passive, right? It's not a force I am applying. It is something that I am
Okay.
doing and people are picking up on.
Yep.
Manipulation is like force applied to drive my own agenda,
Yep.
and likely comes from fear, politics, bureaucracy. Persuasion to me is in the middle, and it can go either way, right? It could be like forceful and negative, or it can be based on influence, and it is okay, maybe I do have an agenda that I need to drive, but instead of manipulating people to it, I will persuade them to a conclusion, i.e., that's what happens in negotiations that are win-win.
Yeah. Okay, so let me see. Here's a real example from my past life.
Okay.
So my colleague Dan, who I've talked about a lot, is the one that, was a challenge for me. I'll just say that. He came to me one time and said, I'm going to lead this project, and I really want you to be a part of it because I love the way you think and you bring people together. Will you be a part of it? Well, what I didn't know, and I was like, oh my gosh, Dan, thank you for inviting me. That was so nice. Yes, of course I want to be a part of it. Well, what I didn't know at the moment was that Dan hadn't gotten it yet. So he was manipulating me so that I wouldn't put my hand up in the air to say I want to lead it. Had he come to me and
Mm.
said, so I think that maybe this is the difference. Had he come to me and said, "Hey, Susie, I'm really excited about this project and I want to lead it. And I know you'd be good at it too. Um, I just want to let you know that. But if I'm the one that has to lead it, I would love for you to be on the team with me."
Yeah. It makes all the difference in the world, intent.
Yeah.
Because one of those is manipulative and the other is transparent and persuasive and has
Yes,
context.
right.
Look at all those layers.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
it.
You're right. It is persuasive and a bit vulnerable because he was putting it out there. If he did it in the right way, he could potentially not be the leader of that. But I would respect him because of that. He lost so much, even like, not that I respected him before that, but once I figured that out, I'm like, it kind of was like, oh, that's Dan. What a jerk. That's what we know about him.
Yes. And so I think that there's a bunch of stuff that comes together in my mind here where it's like, what are you influencing and how are you influencing? Is it manipulative, persuasive, or inherent in both how you talk to people, but also how you act? And are you intentional with how that whole picture is coming together and making people feel the way you want them to feel?
Yeah. Yeah. And yes. And you may need to observe yourself. I like to tell people, observe yourself around this idea because you may be manipulating a situation and not realizing it because
Yeah.
you don't recognize. And so you may be working against yourself and you don't even realize it.
Uh, which goes back to self-awareness.
Totally.
So I think that we just created a direct correlation between influence and self-awareness. Don't lose sight of it, leaders. There's a conversation you need to have with yourself. And again, if you don't want to have it or don't think you need it, you are the first one who should be clicking right to Susie and Angie.
That's right.
So
Yes. And they say that, and this research has been redone, is that if they ask a room of people, are you self-aware or not? More than 80% will say they're self-aware, but the research proves that it's closer to like 15%.
oh, I think that's totally true. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, be careful how you answer that.
Yep.
And it gets worse as you go up. So,
Mhm.
some of the best practices are journaling and meditating and getting feedback because you need to understand what it's like to live outside of you.
Yes, I love you said that. Was that last time when we talked about
Yeah.
feedback, you said that? And I think that that is such a powerful thing to remember and comes to the self-awareness thing, right? We're never going to know what it is to live outside of us, but we
Yeah.
can be aware of how that is perceived by others and what we're influencing on the way.
Yeah.
There you
Yeah.
go.
I worked with a guy one time that I was telling him he's a woo, which is win others over, and that's a Clifton Strengths strength. And he was like, I go, that can feel like not genuine. That can feel like you're just, a brown noser. And he got mad at me and he's like, that's not true. That's not how I am showing up. That's not how people should feel. And it's like, but they do.
Yeah.
You can't
That's
control
the
that.
thing with some of this, if you like in a way, I almost want to say like don't leave it to chance, but then that also makes it sound like I'm telling everyone to go make a certain personality. It's really just being aware of what dots are connecting and if they're the dots you want to connect, because that could very well be happening and you don't realize it. And if you stick your head in the sand or you sit in your ivory tower, there's a good chance
Yeah.
it may happen. So don't lose touch, people. There's a leadership conversation
There
that
you
no one
go.
prepares for. Don't
That's
lose
right.
touch. It's more important now than ever.
Yes. So what tip? Let's think about if you were giving a leader at an executive level a observation that they can do to understand their own influence, what would you have them do?
I might be stealing yours.
Okay.
Know your strengths.
Yeah.
Know the point from which you authentically, genuinely lead, because that will create a much stronger foundation for trust and connection. If you're coming from a place of like genuine authenticity, not buzzword authenticity, versus trying to lead to someone else's strengths or expectations, because that's also going to be exhausting. So know and own and be okay with your strengths, farm out the weaknesses.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, so I'm gonna have to shift because you stole mine.
Okay, sorry. I was like, this is
No.
what's coming to mind, but you asked me first, and I know you're going to say strengths.
Well, I think it's being an observer of, do people confide in you? Do people invite you to meetings? Do they ask for your insight or your input? Seeing how people interact with you and being an observer of that is really powerful because I think we are so busy, go from meeting to meeting to meeting, and we have so much that can be a badge of honor, as we've talked about before. But being an observer of how people interact with you can be really enlightening.
Yeah, there you go. Uh, have a hard conversation with yourself. Maybe that's the TLDR suggestion to wrap us up
Yeah.
today. These are super fun. We covered good ground. And whoever, I can't see who it was, but the conversation or the question about collaboration really took this in a fun direction. So
Yes,
for
thank
those of
you.
you that decide to watch us in the future, don't be afraid to chime in and ask questions. You never know where we'll take it and how we'll sound off. So wait, the next one of these is, let's tell everybody. It's not on LinkedIn yet. Oh, it's not on my calendar yet. Okay, keep your eye out on LinkedIn. We'll tell you when we'll see you again for the next Susie and Angie sound off. I told y'all we're like just raw around here. All
You
right,
just
I'm
rolled
gonna
out of
sign
bed.
off. You never know what you're gonna get. We'll see you all next month for another leadership conversation
Thanks,
no one
Reggie.
prepared you for.